is Deanna Oliver, and my presentation is on the American missionary efforts to Indians between the time of 1830 and 1880. My people are few. They resemble the scattering trees of a storm-swept plain. There was a time when our people covered the land as the waves of a wind-ruffled sea cover its shell-paved floor. But that time long since passed away with the greatness of tribes that are now but a mournful memory. This statement, made by Chief Seattle in the Chief Seattle speech, is a sad but true reality for the majority of Native Americans who lived throughout and following the time of American colonization. The relationship between Native Americans and Americans is chiefly marked by hostility and aggression. Several attempts were made by Americans to establish peaceful relations with the Native Americans, but almost all of them failed due to a lack of care and respect shown for the natives. However, despite the negative feelings harbored by both people groups, missionary efforts were made by Americans in order to bridge that gap between them and the natives. So we're going to begin with the Indian Removal Act of 1830. So in 1825, President James Monroe proposed a plan to remove and relocate the eastern tribes of Native Americans west beyond the line of the Mississippi River. By 1830, the eastern tribes were removed and relocated, and by 1848, 12 new states were created from what was once American Indian country. So during the span of 20 years, approximately 4,000 natives died along the journey, which is known as the Trail of Tears. Missionaries, however, within the U.S. were actually against the Indian Removal Act because they believed in the civilizing and the cleansing of the Native Americans in hopes that they could join the Republic. So that leads us to the purpose of American missionary efforts to the Indians. Why did Americans engage in these efforts? Well, as stated just a moment ago, missionaries believed in Native Americans joining the Republic, but they believed that they needed to be civilized and cleansed in order to do so. So between the time of 1810 and 1820, several Protestant mission groups formed not only in the United States, but also in Canada and England, and they had the sole purpose of creating a worldwide system of missions that would convert the heathen populations. So they believed that factors such as climate and environment shaped your culture, your race, and your beliefs, and they turned these ideas into a plan for their mission work. So how did they do it? Well, the majority of Protestant missionaries would send sponsored missionaries into a region. These missionaries would learn the language, they would translate the Bible, and they would model the Christian life. They would do things like Bible study and school, and they would teach the Indians English and other important parts of the Bible, and they believed that this process would lead to converts, which were really important for within these missionary groups or establishments, because the purpose was to establish a native that would act as the head of the mission so that these missionary groups or societies could go on to the next place and establish a mission there as well. So at least on the surface, this plan seemed to work. However, in North America, those who didn't already have a relationship with the colonial structure, they rejected missionary efforts in hopes to remain independent. In fact, Western Indian groups would remain mobile so that they could move around to avoid missionary efforts. So some people received it well, some groups received it, and some groups were very resistant to it. So missionary methods were constantly changing over the years based on their views and understanding of Indian groups. By the mid-19th century, Protestant missionaries were producing very few converts. They were realizing their methods were pretty ineffective, and without converts, they suffered financially because then they wouldn't have tithe and things like that. So missions became expensive. So over the course of the 19th century, Protestant and Catholic missionary tactics kind of shifted, and they sought to work with the government to stabilize and to gain financial support for their missions because they weren't receiving any from the converts in the reservations. So over the first half of the 19th century, missionary societies moved from working independently to relying on U.S. government for financial support, and this created a big shift in how missionary efforts were received by the Native Americans. So between 1872 and 1878, Ulysses S. Grant set in place a peace policy, and he sought to fix a lot of the corruption from the Indian policies, and he wanted to remove political people in political positions and place missionary societies in their place. While he had good intentions, he believed that the missionaries would put the Indians and peace first. It ultimately failed. Missionary societies, they fought over who would control which agencies, how much money should be granted, and then also Indians weren't given a choice as to which missionary groups would control their reservations, and they had no say in the policies. So really both ways it wasn't working. And by the 1880s, political appointments and the civil service eventually took over the reservations, and shortly after this time, missionary efforts had kind of faded out. So that is the history of American missionary efforts to the Indians between 1830 and 1880. Thank you.